So a couple housekeeping things to start off with. I'd like to just give a quick introduction to the National Farmers Union. For those of you who might not be familiar, the NFU is a membership-based national organization for the collective voices of Canadian farmers working together to fight for agroecology and food sovereignty and to resist corporate control and concentration in the food system. Farmers are our main membership, but all of the rest of the Canadians, the 98% of you who care passionately about our food system but are not farming, we invite you to join us as associate members. Your membership is important to the NFU's work, and we hope that you'll join us to support our fight. We'd also like to take a moment to celebrate our sponsors who made this workshop possible. Tim, if you could just switch to the next slide, please. These are the sponsors who have supported this workshop and the rest of the webinars throughout this month. So thank you to our sponsors for sharing our vision and for supporting this work. We couldn't do it without you. And if you can go to the next slide, I want to just highlight that we have an awesome schedule of workshops all the way through November, leading up to our main days of convention on the 25th through the 28th. So we hope that you'll be able to join us for the main convention and also some of the webinars the rest of the month. The Women's and Youth Caucus meetings are open to all to join. And for the first time, we're also hosting a space for BIPOC farmers to gather and talk about work within the NFU. BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And I'll just note that meeting is for folks who identify as Black, Indigenous, people of color, not for white allies at this time. We will be offering live interpretation into French for all of the workshops throughout the month. So please invite your French-speaking colleagues and friends. I think we've got a slide of the whole workshop schedule in French as well. So this is a first for us, so bear with us as we work through the technical things of managing the interpretation and things like that. So I hope this is working. Oh, it looks like Mara is saying that Ronald, the interpreter, is working on the French channel now, so that's good. I'd also like to just highlight quickly our keynote speaker, who will be on Thursday, November 26th at 3 p.m. Pacific time. We have Seth Klein speaking on his book, A Good War, Mobilizing Canada for the Climate Emergency. Seth is a great speaker, and the topic is, of course, critical to all of us. So please correct for your time zone and join us to learn how we can mobilize collectively to address climate change. There's the poster of his book there. And finally, we would like to acknowledge that each of us, no matter where we're tuning in from, we are on the lands of Indigenous peoples. The NFU is committed to working collectively towards better understanding of settler colonialism in Canada. And we are committed to supporting one another in challenging our individual and collective roles in the ongoing colonization of Indigenous lands and nations. We recognize that as people living and working on the land, farmers share a unique responsibility to create relationships with the Indigenous peoples whose communities and laws govern the lands and waters we depend on for our livelihoods and survival. So we begin today's discussion with a territorial acknowledgement because our aim is to center Indigenous jurisdiction over and responsibility to land in all of our discussions on food sovereignty.
In the age of COVID, what a wonderful distraction to be able to spend 90 minutes with all of you. I've seen some of the names on the participant list, so I know I'm also talking to a number of colleagues and friends. So I love what the NFU stands for and does, and we also have a small farm. And several years ago now, in an act of protest against things that were happening, I joined the NFU and have been a member in good standing for a number of years. So it's really fun to learn what's happening. I think it's really important. So greetings from the University of Manitoba. I'm glad you acknowledged the treaty lands. We're on treaty territory in Winnipeg, and we have campuses in various places around Manitoba. So I'm going to talk about agroecology. And as you can see, I'm just going to ask Ayla to give me a thumbs up if she can see my screen. Okay, great. That's good. So agroecology is different things to different people. And so when you have a talk on agroecology by somebody who professes to know something about it, the talk can be different for each, speaker, each thinker. But Stephen Gleesman, who has written a number of textbooks on agroecology, defines it as a science, as a practice, and as part of a social movement. And I believe that makes a lot of sense. And that's what I'm going to try to touch on today. So I'm assuming that you can all hear me, so I'm just gonna push on. So, what is agroecology? And so what I've done here is just put a list of 8 rows of words which could be used to describe agroecology. And number 8 is other, so I don't want to leave anybody out. So we think about how we manage pests. We think about how we manage nutrients, how we interact with the soil in terms of disturbing it or not disturbing it. We think about trees, aquaculture, water management, both water harvesting and drainage. Livestock integration is huge. I think in that we need to see ourselves as animals as well. And there's other dimensions to agroecology. And the argument that I think a lot of us have made, I'm just one of many, many voices, and I think all of you would make this argument around the dinner table or when you're visiting with friends and colleagues, is that agroecology fits all types of Canadian farming. So here we have, sorry, I'm just trying to minimize things here. Okay, there we go. So here we have some images. British Columbia, a vegetable farm on Vancouver Island. I think I took all these pictures, so I know all these people. That's a great place to practice agroecology, and in fact, I think that's where we learn so much. And one of my introductions to that theme was in North Dakota, where the farmers, the Poldal farmers, they had a garden and they used that as their experimental plot to work with cover crops, work with intercrops, and then they did that on their large grain acreage. In the bottom right, these are Quebec organic farmers. They practice agroecology. The livestock integration I've got on the top right. There's all kinds of livestock integration. I couldn't resist but put the one with the horses. We've of course got no-till on the prairies or reduced tillage. We've got shelter belts. And then on the left, we've got water management, which is becoming, better recognized in our part of the world, both in terms of water harvesting and managing runoff. So agroecology fits. I'm going to give you some examples, but I also want to make the point that agroecology fits in tropical farming. And in fact, a lot of the early definitions of agroecology came from the tropics. Miguel Altieri and Gleesman, they were both in California and they worked together, they still work together. So let me just give you some examples here. On the bottom left is vermicomposting in Nicaragua, and we had the opportunity to work there for a number of years. And the farmer, the one in the ball cap there, is showing us his the troughs where he put his beef cattle manure, and Commandante there is showing us the eggs of the earthworms, of the wigglers that are processing. Above that, very exciting form of agroecology, very hopeful. This is conservation agriculture in Malawi, and you can see the little planting stations and the straw mulch between the planting stations. But what's fascinating is this tree. This is Fiderbia albida. It is a native nitrogen-fixing tree that does grow in some areas of sub-Saharan Africa very well. And it's almost too good to be true, because this tree, being nitrogen fixing, it drops its leaves at the beginning of the rainy season. So at the beginning, when the maize or the maize and beans or whatever are planted in these planting stations, those leaves will drop onto the soil, releasing their nitrogen. And I've seen it where around the tree, it's much greener because there's more nitrogen. And then the tree stays dormant for much of the period of, and then when it dries off and the corn is already tasseled, then it leaves out again and it shades the landscape. And it is a very good climate mitigation strategy, because it can really cool the field quite significantly. It's called a reverse phenology tree. And then on the bottom right, and the bottom center, is a picture that I took in Kenya. And we were working there on different conservation agriculture programs. And this young farmer, she had on her own experimented with lablab, which is a legume, a semi-perennial legume. So she grew it with the maize. After the maize was harvested, she also harvested lablab seeds, and they're very valuable. They're high in protein. They traditionally been used for nursing mothers. And then this thing regrows, and the community was really quite surprised, very proud of her, and she showed it to us. So these are examples of agroecology, and over on the right, I've just summarized some of the information from Jules Pretty, who's at Exeter in England, done a lot of work on developmental agronomy. And he makes the point that when you summarize these agroecology projects, like the one that I've listed, they do lead to significant yield increases. And in fact, they lead to the type of yield increases that the world needs, especially sub-Saharan Africa, which is one of those places in the world where the human population is going to continue to increase for the next 60 years. Of course, as you know, we think now that the world's population in most other parts of the world is going to decline by the end of the century, but not there. So agroecology fits at home. It also fits in tropical agriculture. And when we talk about, you know, the feed the world thing, you know, the narrative that comes, that we hear so much from agribusiness and from universities like mine, you know, I think one thing we can share with them is that these agroecological practices, which are not necessarily corporate owned, but they're owned in the minds of the communities, they're highly effective at achieving that goal. So now when we think about agroecology or ecological farming, it has been the norm in our region, certainly where I'm sitting here right now. I'm about 5 kilometers from the Red River. And we know that agriculture has taken place here for a long time. My knowledge started with the picture on the left. I learned quite a while ago that the Mandan tribes had sedentary population settlements along the Missouri River in North Dakota, which is just south of here. And they grew maize and beans. And on the top right, you can see a picture of the Three Sisters, sort of a recreation in Clearwater, Manitoba by the community there. So I knew that. But what I didn't know is that in 1400 AD, people were farming along the Red River, just north of where I am right now. And the province of Manitoba put up this plaque, which I've enlarged a small section of it. It's called The First Farmers in the Red River Valley. And that's carbon dated back to 1400 AD. And they farmed along the river for a bunch of really obvious reasons in terms of transportation, but maybe not such obvious reasons to the untrained people who are not involved in agriculture. They farmed along the lake because it didn't freeze as early along the lake as it did away from the river or away from the bottom of Lake Winnipeg. And so that I find that fascinating. I want to give you another example. This one's from Hawaii, and there were these indigenous resource management systems in Hawaii called the Ahapua'a, and I had a chance to visit and study this one. And what it is, I guess my cursor is working, which is great. So it's really a food system which starts at in the ocean, at the edge of the ocean, and then these ponds where they manage water and grow things like taro and other plants. And then up the hill, there's trees and pepper trees and breadfruit trees, and up at the top there's the timber that they can use that they used to construct buildings and canoes. And there was also a spiritual element to this. And when my wife Geraldine and I went there, you see this cheesy picture of me. There's a foundation here, and this is where the agroecologist lived. And they actually told us in this interpretive center that the head person of the Ahapua'a was an agroecologist. So I couldn't help but want to share this picture with you, because this actually speaks to the word that we're trying to, discuss today. Now, one of the things that really interesting is the water management here. I mean, this is an area where water is scarce, and the fresh water, it comes from here. It doesn't come from here. The ocean is salt water. And I had to make the analogy to what's happening in many parts of Canada, where this is just an example from Ian McCreary that I stole from a PowerPoint that he gave, full disclosure. But it shows how land is mapped now in terms of the hydrology and the topography and the yield potential, and also the runoff. And I think there's a real strong connection here between what happens in the Hawaiian experience and what happens with us. So, I'm excited about this stuff, and I'm a sort of I'm a professor. I teach courses, and so I'm always looking for opportunities to get the students excited about this. How do I spread the word? Well, I had this idea, Netflix, we all know what Netflix is, and maybe we could make a Netflix series on agroecology fits. And so that's what I'm going to go through with you now, for better or worse. So lucky or unlucky you. But I'm calling my Netflix series Agroecology Farmers, Misfits of a Modern Food System. And then the book there says, only misfits can solve this mystery. So, and that's really my argument, is that agroecologists have tools which are unique and are increasingly viewed as important. So, okay, here we go. Netflix, I've got my, financing. We're ready to go, ready to roll. So I'm going to have the first season. And the season opener is called This Old Landscape. And it's kind of a takeoff of This Old House. So now this old landscape applies to northern China. The Lost Plateau is an area the size of France. It's massive. And China, as we know, has the longest continuous agriculture on the planet, over 6,000 years, and maybe longer. And it's very degraded. The landscape is very degraded. And so they've gone from a landscape of this to a landscape like this. And the agroecological principles were applied here. And there were also some engineering principles applied, like terracing or re-terracing or improving the terracing, plant diversity, trees, water management. And I first learned about this season opener from a person called John Liu. And John Liu is a filmmaker, and he has documented the transformation of the Lost Plateau in Northwest China. And the top two pictures there, on the left before, on the right after, are things that he has described, and you can look him up and get his documentary videos online, and they're quite fascinating. I have had the chance to work in Northwest China with Langzhou University since I first learned about this, and so I've traveled through this area a couple of times and studied it, and it's really quite remarkable. It's not easy. But the problem here was that the land was so degraded, it required almost an entire ecological restoration. And it's made a big difference. Now, John has also covered the same type of thing in Ethiopia, in Rwanda, in Jordan, in the Middle East, which I love because the Middle East is so fraught with challenges. Healing people's relationships through agroecology, I think, is really good. Okay, so that's the first episode. I know I've got you riveted now. You're going to go and see if this thing is actually on Netflix now. Episode 2, I'm calling it The Conservation Underground. It's kind of a taking off from Liz Carlisle's book, The Lentil Underground, which talks about the lentil farmers of Montana, and David Oyen and Timeless Seeds, and just a wonderful story. But the Conservation Underground, this is a movement that's happened. It's been farmer driven to a large extent. It certainly was in Canada, as we all know. The no-till revolution started 30 years ago, and it wasn't started by the mainstream agribusiness or universities or federal governments. It was started by farmers. And it was also started, anyways, I think a lot of us know that history, but it's also been practiced elsewhere in the world, in Zimbabwe and Central America. The picture on the left is one that I took in Honduras, and it shows just an ideal conservation agriculture system. The corn or maize has been harvested. The beans have been planted. You can see them here between the rows. This is a very steep hill slope. It's the land that the locals are relegated to. Wonderful. This is a picture in Zimbabwe, and where there's conservation agriculture with legume intercropping. So conservation, the underground, that's going to be an awesome series. And we're going to go to Honduras and Zimbabwe, and we're going to go to Kenton, Manitoba. Now you can all look up where that is. But we're also going to feature a number of farmers, because I mentioned that this was a farmer-driven revolution. And I saw it evolve because, and I'm going to describe the production manuals of the Manitoba, North Dakota Zero Tillage Farmers Association. And what the contents of these production manuals tells us is that these farmers really evolved in their thinking. So back in 1991, this production manual was really about how to deal with residue, what herbicides to use, how to mechanically put the seed through this thatch, and it was the beginnings of no-till. The 1997 manual was also taking into account wildlife. It had a lot of livestock integration examples. It was much broader. It talked about crop diversity, rotation. And then the 2011 version, it reads like an agroecology textbook. It's got a picture of an earthworm, a soil profile, a bovine. It is agroecology. And so I just wanted to share this evolution because it was something that farmers did. And yes, they had some extension workers to help them and some scientists, but really it was a revolution that they drove themselves. And we've seen a similar type of revolution in other areas, organic farming, CSAs, the grazing revolution, and that type of thing. Okay, now, if there's any children, maybe it's time to go maybe get a popsicle in the fridge, because we're going to talk about something pretty racy here in episode 3, the bacteria atmosphere affair. It's kind of modeled after and it's an affair to remember. And so the atmosphere in the background here, as we know, contains 78% nitrogen. And when those little bacteria, shack up with these nodules, good things happen. And we all know what happens. Nitrogen is drawn from the atmosphere into the plant, and it allows the plant to function on its own. It doesn't require external nitrogen. So what does that look like on the landscape? Well, I talked about the example on the left, the lab in Kenya. This is quite a transformative cropping system, and a lot of scientists, both in Africa and development agronomists, have really embraced the idea of these semi-perennials, such as lab and pigeon pea, because of their role in providing soil cover and nitrogen during the dry season or during the off season when the main crop is not growing. They are quite transformative. And so the atmosphere bacteria affair is really helping out this community. And if we look closer to home, some of you may recognize Gabe Brown in that picture on the right. Gabe is written the book Dirt to Soil, and he's transformed their farm, which was quite run down, to a much more productive soil, using combinations of legumes with composites and grasses, and then grazing them. So that is got a lot of farmers excited, and he has quite a following. He does a lot of speaking. One of the other places, just to share some science information with you, in our long-term organic conventional comparison study, what we are really excited about is learning that the legume-based organic systems, when they're rotated with wheat and other grains, they actually produce about 30, sometimes even a lot more like 50 to 60% less nitrous oxide per bushel of wheat produced. And so these legume-based systems can not only offset the nitrogen that's required to put into the system, but if they're managed correctly, they can also reduce the emissions of nitrous oxide from the legumes themselves, because legumes also emit nitrous oxide. It's not just nitrogen fertilizer. And this is Megan Westfall, one of our grad students, and who did the work. Okay, episode 4, Great Bags of Fire. Some of you have heard of Great Balls of Fire, but that's wrong. They got it wrong. It's called Great Bags of Fire. And I was first exposed to this in Costa Rica. On the left, on the bottom, is what looks like a silage bag. And what happened in this community is the hydroelectric utility had a reservoir and it was silting in. And so they were working with the landowners upstream from the reservoir to try to get them to reduce erosion and reduce, manure running into the thing. And so my colleague Laura Sims worked there, and this is her picture on the left. And so one of the things that the utility did is gave farmers these bags. They put all the manure and things in the bag, and it produced methane. It's the most magical system of which I knew nothing about maybe 12 years ago or so. And so the picture on the right shows another farm. And in this case, I have this is my picture. And in the back, there's the silage bag. And then this tube comes up to the house on the road, which is where they bring the milk and they boil it to make cheese. And this tube brings up the methane. So this is a brilliant system, because you put the manure in the bag, it produces methane. Methane is CH4, carbon and hydrogen. All the nitrogen, everything else is left, can be used as fertilizer. And the nice thing about Great Bags of Fire, this episode is we're gonna bring it home, and we're gonna start talking about these cows in southern Alberta. And what they're doing there at Lethbridge Biogas is they don't use silage bags, they use these things, and they do the anaerobic digestion. They capture the methane and make electricity out of it. Now that's super hopeful in my opinion. So electricity from poop. Oh, did I say that publicly? Yeah, why not? Awesome. And so this company has been around since 2013, and they've just expanded in 2020. Now, we don't just need cows to do this. We're starting to do this with our kitchen scraps and with other municipal wastes. They're going into biodigesters in different parts of the country, and they produce gas. That methane can be used for different purposes, and then it produces the stuff left over in the silage bag. They call it digestate, and that can be used as an organic fertilizer. And there's another company in Canada that's been using the food waste, feeding it to insects, black soldier flies, and collecting the frass or the poop off the insect, and that's also an organic fertilizer. So this is starting to think about the circular nutrient system, and remember we said one of those principles of agroecology was integrated nutrient management. This is an example of that. And here's a picture of one of our grad students' field plots. This is organic wheat, although it's a research trial. We've got the organic wheat, no fertility, monoammonium phosphate, and then the insect frass. And this one yielded exactly the same. So these nutrients are very useful in agriculture. So how far can we take this? This is an image that I have shown students for many years, integrated farming system, and our former dean at our university had done work in India, and he shared some of these experiences with me. And I always found them interesting. I think it's an aspirational system for Canada, but we're getting there. So let me just show you how it could work. So we've got grains, we've got rice and legumes and maize. We feed that to animals, chickens or goats or cattle. And then what we can do is we can put these goats in this shed, or we can put these chickens in here, and they can put their droppings in the water. The ducks, duckweed will grow, the ducks can eat it. The ducks will produce manure, it'll sink to the bottom of the pond, and we're worried about E. coli, but these tilapia fish that live in there, they can actually process E. coli. All by themselves, no biotech required. And then the manure from the dairy can go into the biogas and produce lighting for the house and or electricity or whatever. And then the leftover compost could be put into vermicomposting bins to process it before it goes on the land. And you get the picture. And so, this I think is very exciting. It's aspirational for Canada, but through these agroecological steps, we're getting there. Okay, what's left? Episode 5. I think this is the last one. I call this Strawberry Fields. And you can see the people who wrote the song, or at least I think who wrote the song on the right. Now here's a question. Are these strawberries the same or are they different? Well, they actually, let's just say they were produced in different farming systems. So in this study, John Reginauld, who's done a lot of this kind of work, he's at Washington State University, and he's asked himself the question a lot about the nutritional properties of crops that are produced organically or conventionally, interested in the soil, functional genes. And this is what he found in this one particular study, which I've cited here. It's open access, you can get a hold of it, that the organic strawberries were significantly higher in antioxidants. We know that antioxidants are important for us because they scavenge these free radicals that can cause diseases in our bodies. And they're also significantly higher in phenolics. Phenolics is what we call secondary plant metabolites, and they're important for nutrition. There's many different types of phenolics. And so, the strawberry fields were different, and that's what we'll feature in this Netflix video. And in this case, so, the question is why? Why do these organic systems, and can we transfer some of these organic ideas into conventional? Well, a lot of the reason why we have more beneficial compounds in the organic system relates to the soil health, relates a little bit to the way maybe composts are used. It relates to the fact that the plants are maybe under a little bit more stress, and stress can be a good thing. It can trigger a lot of genes which cause these things to be produced. So that's something of what we know about these questions. Okay, so there you have it. That's my pitch to Netflix. Let's see if they go for it. I did want to make a few comments about agroecology as a social movement, because it's something that I've thought about, and I had never realized that, 1 in 8 people on the planet live in slums. I've worked hard to find these statistics. These are the best, to the best of my ability, this is what I know exists. And at the bottom of the picture on the left, it says that in Central America, 21% of urban dwellers live in slums. That percentage has gone down over the last 30 years, from like 30% down to 21%. But the total number is going up because the number of people living in urban centers is going up. So why am I talking about this? I'm an agronomist. It's because of the family on the top right. This is Ramon. This is a family that we worked with in Nicaragua. And he's a farmer together with his extended family. That's his son on the plow. And they have about 6 hectares, which is a fairly, really nice farm in Nicaragua. They've got livestock, they've got crops. And when I travel around Nicaragua, I look at the rural areas, and I think, this is a place where the communities are intact. And when you go to the urban areas, that's not always the case. So I understand why people are protesting in countries to have access to land, to have access to opportunities, or at the very least have the choice to either stay on the land or and avoid perhaps an urban slum. And bringing this back to the biological agroecology, we worked with the local universities in 3 Central American countries on comparing sort of agroecological practices with the status quo. We're mostly interested in exposure to pesticides by the farmers and by the communities. This is a picture of 2 of Ramon's tomato crops. And we worked there alongside them for 6 years. We probably experienced about, 14, 16 crop cycles, because there's like almost 3 crops a year. And the rotation was beans, maize, and tomato. Both on the top left, one of the parcels had mineral fertilizers, synthetic insecticides, no cover crops. And the bottom right had composted manure, which they made themselves. They used mung bean cover crops and the neem insecticide, which grew on the trees, which are on the right-hand side of that picture. And in this particular visit, there had been the volcano had erupted and caused a lot of dust in the area. And the tomatoes that were grown agroecologically did much better. And, the farmers they were not going back. Their maize had caught up, their beans were doing better, and their tomatoes were doing better using these agroecological practices. And I don't want to be naive, but I do think that this does allow that family a greater agency over their future. And because that little boy, I'd rather see that person grow up with a sense of freedom on a farm than living in an urban slum. So that's why I brought that. And this is Ramon's dad with the red ball cap and his brother. This is one of the Nicaraguan researchers. I have a final thought. I hope you can see this slide. It shows the Roman Empire at its greatest extent, which was in, I guess, 117 AD. And so, they pretty well ran the entire Mediterranean basin in Europe and West Asia and North Africa. But, and they would have done everything the way the Romans sort of had organized. It was very centrally planned, of course. But when the Roman Empire collapsed, it ushered in the Dark Ages. And, that's a fascinating history. And Enlightenment came from the fringes, not just from Ireland, but it also came from the East. Eventually this part of the world, went back to living into brick houses as opposed to which they lived in, hundreds of years before. Um, and so I think you know the point that I'm making here is that the Roman Empire collapsed, and in order to resuscitate this area, ideas had to come in from the outside. I think there is definitely an analogy here with industrial agriculture, which focuses on a whole bunch of things, including centralization and standardization. Now, some standardization is good. Having classes of wheat, for example, allows us to access international markets in a coherent, intelligent way, but we can take it too far where the standardization just drives the diversity out of the system, and that's what we've seen in Canada. And centralization has also been a problem because in a diverse area, you need some local control. So my argument that I discuss with myself is that industrial agriculture is not friendly to Earth's life sustaining forces. And it is collapsing. And I've had some conversations with people like John Eichart, who from Missouri, who feels that the American people might one day just have a tax revolt and not want to support the kind of industrial agriculture that they're supporting right now through their subsidies and through their biofuel programs. So industrial agriculture, it's starting to unravel, both for biological reasons and maybe for economic reasons and maybe even for social reasons. And I think that agroecology will play a central role in the enlightenment of the industrial agricultural regions, because the knowledge in the people on the left there, the knowledge that they have is exactly what's required for a sustainable food system. And so, I could say, I rest my case and we can talk about it. But I really feel that agroecology has become, or, natural systems agriculture, or ecological agriculture and well-managed organic farms and that type of thing. I think it's reached a level of sophistication where it does now have not only something to offer, but it probably needs to move into a more central position in things like policy making and even business development. So thank you for your attention. You can get a hold of me this way, and we have a YouTube channel which you can, we put some new YouTubes up. They're not professional. They're not like the Netflix series that we're all going to make together. So thank you very much for your attention.